if you wish, certainly. So let's start it. Thank you very much, Rahim.
Thanks, John. I'll just take literally a minute or two, because I'm sure we want to share as much information from the pilot as possible. But just to say, first off, a big thank you to everybody who has been involved in this. I went to visit, as you mentioned earlier, John, the Wythenshawe pilot, and I was really sort of blown away by how taking, a little bit from each aspect of the partnership, we can actually have a much bigger impact by all just working together on something. It's taking the expertise and the relationships of the housing group in Wythenshawe, which Nick has done a huge amount of work around for many years. But those grassroots level relationships matter so much when we're reaching out to people in an inclusive way. It's the expertise and the passion and the social responsibility of the internet service providers. It's the sense that it's good for their business if people are connected, but it's also good for society if we get more and more people involved in this. And it's the creativity, the sort of drive of the combined authority to say, well, why can't we do something a bit different in Greater Manchester? Why can't we innovate and push the boundaries and start to lead some of the way on this? So it really felt to me like everybody was coming together, and at the heart of it were the residents that we spoke with, who, in their own words, just told us how well this system had worked and how it had made things better. And it was really interesting because they didn't say everything was rosy and everything was perfect. They still talked about their fears and their risks about getting online, and in the truest sense, they were the real people here that sometimes, I don't know, in meetings you can lose sight of. And I thought it was a great event to really encapsulate the strength of the partnerships and the reality that we all face in trying to deal with digital inclusion challenges. But it left me thinking, this is something that absolutely has to be shared, has to be rolled out in other places, that we have to take the learning from this and make it not just a pilot, but standard practice where we can in Greater Manchester and beyond. So hopefully that's what we will get a focus on here today, as well as that learning and all of the information and experiences that we took away from this, a real sense of what we can do next with it. Because we've just refreshed our digital blueprint, and there's a lot of exciting opportunities in Greater Manchester. It's the fastest growing digital economy in Europe, and globally being recognized and highlighted as a place people want to come and set up and do digital. We've got to make sure that's inclusive. We've got to make sure that every citizen in Greater Manchester can participate at their own level, at their own pace, but participate fully in that. And so it's a big challenge on us, but it's a huge opportunity if we get it right. And I think this is a great example of how we've managed to do that in a really, really inclusive and innovative way. So again, I'll reiterate my thanks, John, to everybody who's been involved in this. And I'm really looking forward to where we can take it next. So happy to leave it there and get into the thick of the meeting.
Well, thank you very much for those kind words. And I think it kind of highlights the fact that, this has always been a discovery piece, one that we everybody who's been involved in it kind of accepted that it, there'll be good stuff and bad stuff that comes out of this, but ultimately it will help us to learn how best we can tackle it. Now, what I wanted to do now is just give a little bit of a recap as to what the pilot program is about, so that, and I know there's a number of people on the call from across the UK who, and some, it might well be their first session that they've attended. So let me just give a quick 2 or 3 minute recap on what it is and what we're looking to do, if that's okay, and then we'll move into the agenda. So the original objectives of this social housing pilot, which started around about 15 months ago now, was it's very much about discovery, and it's about looking at how can we develop a long-term sustainable solution to address digital exclusion in social housing. And what is the role of the social housing provider working with industry, internet service provider, the local authority? What roles do all these individual players need to do in order to make a model work? And to what extent is a commercial model actually possible? Is it possible to create a viable commercial model that where the people who can afford to pay for digital connectivity can actually subsidise those who can't? And then, as Councillor O'Brien mentioned, well, what does it look like in terms of an optimum model for GM-wide rollout across Greater Manchester? So to kind of reinforce the point here, it's all about discovery. There's no success or failure on this. It's about discovery and learning. And importantly, there's no public sector funding involved. It's really, there's been industry support for the research in this project, and it's been undertaken drawing upon the goodwill of all partners involved. And I think that's what's been fantastic about this piece of work. So in terms of what Tim is going to talk about shortly, in terms of the feedback and research, it's all important intelligence that will help us to define how we move forward and what that looks like. So just a quick summary of where we are with across Greater Manchester. It's estimated around about 1.2 million people in Greater Manchester digitally excluded in some way. 260,000 people live in social housing in Greater Manchester, and we believe that that's a lot of that proportion is going to be those that are digitally excluded, probably around about 60% of those, we estimate. And there are lots of things around that social housing tenants need, lots of services they need, that digital is a key service that they need to access. So say for financial management, for welfare advice, health advice, and job search. So we know all of that through the work that has been led here by largely by Bina Puri, who's been working really closely with Andy Burnham on the kind of wider digital inclusion agenda, and Councillor O'Brien too. So we've got 5 different social housing pilots that we've been progressing with over the last 15 months. So, and we've got the 5 largest internet service providers working with 5 significant social housing providers working across different dwelling types with a pilot size that's varied, around about 1,000 we started off, and some we've gone a little bit broader than that. The timeline, we've reached the point now where we are at the end of the programme in terms of the pilot work. It ends formally on the 31st of March. There's some further wrapping up that we're going to be doing over the coming weeks in terms of informing some of that research. But the plan is to have an event in June this year, which pulls everything together and looks at what large-scale rollout of a programme will look like. So there's a lot of work that we need to do in the meantime. But this session now is about the kind of final, the final research that has been gathered by CIM, and will feed into the final event in June. And just as a final slide, all this is really about how we look at digital inclusion in the context of the commercial opportunity for the internet service provider, and also the kind of responsible business aspects of internet service provider, social value, CSR, etc., and the roles of social housing provider, the local authority, and also, most importantly, I think, not most important, but as important, is where there is, where commercial activity can only go so far, where is government intervention needed? So there's those other aspects, and the research finding will also inform that too. So I'll stop there at that point, and then perhaps if I can ask Sim to talk about where he is in terms of the research, and then we've got Rachel Evans from Vodafone is going to talk about the work they've been doing in Southway together with Joe Sandwick as well from Southway Housing is going to talk about that too. But perhaps I can introduce Tim at this point to talk about that. Actually, just before I do that, Nick, is there any other points that you would want to make as kind of leader of the social housing project from the social housing perspective?
Just to echo really the points that have been made about how crucial this project's been in terms of just discovering the reality of making digital inclusion happen. And I think the point made by Councillor O'Brien that actually this is, unlike many pieces of work that I've seen that we do across GMHP and the GMCA, which is kind of partners talking to partners. This has very much been about vertical discussion with people at the front end experiencing digital exclusion and, you know, understanding from them real hardcore evidence as to what the barriers and indeed opportunities are, so that we can crack things from that evidence base. So it's genuinely been one of the best initiatives that I've had the privilege of being involved with, which is great. So very much looking to hearing the results of the research, and of course to supporting the wider rollout later in the year.
Thanks, Nick. Tim, do you want to kick off with where you are on the research?
Okay, well, hello everybody. To those people I've met before, it's great to see you again, and to any new people, thanks for being here. So for those who don't know me, I'm Simeon Yates. I'm the Professor of Digital Culture at the University of Liverpool, and I do a lot of research on issues of digital inclusion and exclusion. And we've been kind of leading the research work for this project. I'm sorry I'm a little croaky today, but I went to an event in Manchester last week and came back with a cold. And also, it's nice to see Councillor O'Brien here, because I'm Bury born and bred originally, but been a long way away from Bury for quite a while now, and my brother still lives there. So there we go. It's nice to have home faces, as it were. So I'm just going to talk today about the last bit. Well, not quite the last bit. We've still got other things we're ongoing, but the last stage, or this last set of stakeholders we've talked to as part of the research. And I need to make an admission here, is the one that we've not yet finished the interview with is the Vodafone colleagues, who are presenting slightly later on. So everything I say about ISPs is everything but not Vodafone, because we've not spoken to them yet. So I'm sure it will resonate. Just to remind colleagues that there's been multiple aspects to this piece of work. You know, we've talked to people on the ground delivering in social housing areas. We've talked to the social housing providers and their digital inclusion or kind of digital support leads. I see a few recognizable faces around the room, so thank you for all your contributions to that. We've also talked to local government, including local government outside of the pilot who are doing similar things in Greater Manchester, to get a feel for the issues from their point of view. And the last set of interviews we've been with internet service providers. So I'm going to talk about kind of reflections from the conversations with ISPs here. But Bina did ask me also just to do a quick overview of our bigger national minimum digital living standards project, which is kind of a national project to look at these issues more broadly. So I will try and do a really fast version of that at the end of these few slides on the ISPs. So I think I need to add the caveat I added last time, is when we started this, we kind of called this a research evaluation. It is an evaluation. We're not kind of evaluating you know, success or whatever. We've been really fact finding, because every one of these interventions has been an experiment. You know, it's not been here's a policy we really think will work, let's check it did. It's been more, we're trying different ways to solve an issue, and we've been learning from it. So the caveat being that if I'm saying things that sound like, oh, that's not worked quite as we'd hoped, or we've found an issue or a barrier, I'm not doing this as a criticism. I'm doing this as this is what we found. And I think the best bit about this project, and I need to say this about everybody, all the different partners, is the kind of honest discussion about what their challenges have been, and also being done in a kind of really positive way. So that's been really a really positive experience from a research point of view. So let me share my slides, and we will get going. And can everybody see that? Because you've all gone really small now. Right. So a lot of words on these rather than numbers. You know, normally I do numbers, but today I'm going to do words. I mean, this is something that we've been finding both in this pilot and elsewhere in work we've been doing. And we do know from the national figures that uptake of social tariffs is nowhere near where we really want it to be. And part of, as John said, one of the research questions here is you know, is there a kind of economically or a kind of commercially viable model of delivering broadband? I'm going to say here that I think what we found is there's still a gap, you know, and I'm also going to caveat that with something I said talking to Ofcom's industry consumer panel yesterday on a similar call, that this isn't necessarily a critique of social tariffs in and of themselves, or the kind of level to which ISPs have been able to commercially offer them. I think it's just a gap between the reality of what is commercially affordable or doable by the ISPs and what people who are living in social housing, or some of the people living in social housing, who incomes can actually cope with. So we know from the survey work that Stockport did, that we analysed, that, you know, a sweet spot for social tariffs for their tenants was kind of in the £4 to £12 range, which puts them below where most social tariffs are. And from the conversations we've had with ISPs as part of this programme and elsewhere, there's not much more leeway on social tariffs from their point of view. We're also rolling that, slowly but surely rolling that survey out to the other social housing areas, and I doubt we're going to see much difference. Also, if you look at Ofcom's recent work on affordability and you kind of dig down into it, you kind of find that the average UK household is spending just less than 2% of their income on broadband. That's what it's costing them as a part of their monthly costs. Now, if you apply that to people on universal credit or people in part-time work on universal credit, you come up with £4 to £7. So, you know, people are not silly with their money. So I think it shows that, you know, the affordability for people on low incomes, especially those on benefits, is below the social tariff. And in talking to the ISPs, then I think there's a question there about how you marry up what's commercially viable for them with what's affordable by the residents, with the fact that there are other people who were going to benefit from the residents being online. I mean, the social housing providers themselves, because maybe they'll start transaction savings costs, similarly for local government, similarly for DWP, similarly for Department for Health, and so on. Misspelled government there. There is a question then about how you if the offer is going to be just a social tariff, it's not, from the research we've done here, not going to necessarily fly on its own. So there is a question there about how you address that gap. I mean, and later on I'll mention that, you know, one of the ISPs has been working directly with DWP to support job seekers by filling that gap with vouchers, you know, that DWP are paying for, you know, so that there's a question there about how we deliver that. Now, one of the other things that we've talked about in this is the VAT, you know, and treating broadband as a utility. If you treat broadband as a utility and only put 5% VAT on it, then the cost of a social tariff drops to close to that affordability barrier, you know, and I know that £4 a week or £4 a month or £3 a month difference doesn't sound a huge amount, but if your disposable income at the end of the month is, you know, you know, 30 or 50 or 60 pounds, then knocking a few pounds off that does impact, you know, the capacity of residents to pay for it. So I think our learning on social tariffs is two things. They're not quite working for the residents, but the ISPs have probably taken them as far as they can take them on a commercial basis, but there's still a gap there to think about. Infrastructure, I thought this was quite fascinating, actually. I'm going to say, because we're also doing a lot of work in Wales with the Welsh Government on digital inclusion. And one of the issues that's constantly brought up is the cost of getting infrastructure to rural areas of Wales. And then we've had some really fascinating conversations with the ISPs, especially where they've been having to put new, you know, basically new cable, new connectivity into social housing areas as part of the pilot or as part of their work in those areas, and talking us through the both legal and financial and practical costs of delivering that. And any ISPs on the call will know this stuff much better than I. But it was quite interesting to realize that there may be as much cost or very similar cost to wiring up an old tower block when you're going into the costs of putting the wires into the tower block, the costs of the way leaves and the legal stuff, the infrastructure issues, the fact that, you know, it's very difficult to put that telecoms infrastructure into a building that wasn't designed for it in the first place, that you end up with cold spots in the middle of cities, which are, in terms of population, the same size as a small rural village in Wales. So I do think there is something there about how we make it easier for how local government or regional, you know, devolved authorities, if they've got any policy levers, to make some of those processes easier. And I know colleagues have been talking about way leave things and stuff like that, about how you make it easier or less trouble to get that infrastructure in. And that will, and I think it does impact on the commercial viability of doing this for ISPs, because if we're going to get low take up and it's a big cost to put it in, it, you know, the maths doesn't work. But there is a caveat to that I'll come on to in a moment about working together. So next one. So working together. I know, let's be honest, everybody's worked really hard on this, and everybody's really tried to make things work, and we've had some really good examples of things working and so on, but that doesn't mean it's all been kind of smooth sailing. And again, and like I said earlier, these are not criticisms, these are findings. I think we've all found that the on the ground partners of the social housing providers and so on are dealing with clients in a cost of living crisis. This wasn't, if to use that phrase, you know, that if I was going to travel there, I wouldn't start from here. I mean, you probably wouldn't choose to do a pilot in the midst of a cost of living crisis. So that's put a lot of pressure on people who've got day jobs. And I think also these are every single one of the partners is a complex organization with multiple silos in it. You know, the ISPs have got the infrastructure bit, the billing part, the corporate social responsibility part, the local government has got its own department, social housing, if it's a separate thing, has got its own departments. And very often this has required people working across multiple bits of already complex organizations. You know, so to get this to happen, people have had to work across those silos. And I think everyone's noted that's been a challenge. And I think, you know, that I don't think this is a criticism, but it was a comment. I think a lot of the ISPs have said that the public sector speeds at which things go from decision to implementation were slower than they were kind of used to, and therefore there was organizational kind of understandings that were needed. And this is more of a comment from me, with very few of the organizations, whether it's the ISPs, the local government, or the social housing, have got people whose sole job is to do digital inclusion work. Often somebody's got it in their title, or some people have got it in their title, but it's not everything that they do. And I do think that leads to some issues. First off, they're often in a silo. They're in education, or they're in corporate social responsibility, or they're in infrastructure in these different organizations. And so when they're trying doing the pilot, they're having to work across other bits of the organization. And very often they're not senior. So they're working up above their grade, as it were, and then across the organization. So I think there's something in there about, if you're going to do this again, making sure that each organization's got someone with the warrant to be the digital inclusion lead and work across the organization and have some ownership of that strategy, so that they've got, if not the clout, then the right to go and push things across the organizations. There was an awful lot of people talk through how they'd been very successful at doing that, but it had not been straightforward. So I do think there's something about having someone for whom it's solely their job, or it is primarily their role. And that's not just for ISPs, that was for all parties. I think one of the things, and I think this resonates with what the councillor said, you know, that some of the working with communities has worked really well. And one of the ISPs we talked to felt that that was where they could really add value more than the social tariff stuff. They pushed the social tariff as far as they could, but if they were going to add value, it was providing community resources, providing community support to help with the skills, to help with the safety net of local provision, etc. And also one of the things was working with public sector partners on a specific needs of a specific community. So that might be people job seeking, it might be people, you know, disabled people or whatever, that allows them to really have an impact on the skills. And in the case of like the job seekers, on the assumption that if you get people into work, they're earning, they'll become long-term digital users, because it becomes part of both what sustains their ability to get work and be in work and manage their way through government systems, but also, you know, longer term, they become a good customer to whoever the ISPs might be. So I think there's something in there about ISPs, if they are going to do some of these interventions, working really carefully with the local community about what will work, what will hit a core group for that area, or that what one of the key needs for that local council or broader area like Manchester might be, you know, to help a bit more of a targeted intervention. So that came out of the discussions as well, that there's that community role could be something that's actually easier to do than some of the other things like the social tariffs. So just some quick summaries. From my point of view, this is my interpretation. I'm not saying this is Greater Manchester's interpretation or any of the other people we've interviewed interpretation, but from my interpretation, social tariffs don't work well for social housing tenant as they're currently offered. This does not mean that I'm saying, oh, ISPs have to drop them even further. If they can't do that commercially, they can't do that commercially. But there are others in the loop who will benefit from people being online beyond the families or the households themselves. So there's something in there about how you square that circle. That need for dedicated digital inclusion roles. I mean, I think that's just been a perennial truth in this space for as long as I've worked in it, and I've been doing digital inclusion work since early 2000s, that it works really well where somebody's got the role and they've got the ability to be over both the data, the research, the information, etc., but also the organization. How do we make it easier for ISPs to do the practical stuff and making people connected? Just a flag from the last kind of research session, other models are out there. You know, the work, say, that Rochdale's done on Wi-Fiing up some tower blocks. And lastly, I think skills were maybe not as strong a part of the pilot as they could have been. And I think, as maybe what I'll mention with the minimum digital living standard, skills are as much of an important thing as getting the access. And so there's something there about adding that to the mix in any future interventions. So do you want me to just pause there before I jump on, John, or do you want me to just carry on?
It would be good, perhaps at this point, it's probably be good to invite any questions, because there's some really important stuff, I think, in there in terms of those findings. So if you'd like to, anybody who's got any questions, if you'd like to put your hand up, that would be that would be great. I've got a couple of other observations of this. One is that what's interesting about where market is across Greater Manchester and indeed across the UK is there's a lot of investment going on in digital infrastructure across the UK at the moment, and you know, from various equity investment, lots of what we call altnets, in addition to people like Virgin Media, BT, Hyperoptic, and others, and all of those internet service providers require take up of their services in order that they can make, you know, deliver a return on investment. So it does strike me that there is something around the work with the internet service provider around accelerating, working to accelerate take up irrespective. And I think we've particularly found that in Wigan as well. And the other point I want to make, the issue of barriers to investment as well, about reducing the cost to the market to invest. And one of the great things from this project, it's highlighted this challenge. And what we've been doing is we've been getting industry together to come up with a joint agreement on wayleaves and specifications on the back of this program. So it's one positive outcome already from it, and we're hoping to have that in place by May. Councillor O'Brien, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thanks, John, and thanks, Simeon, for the research. And I thought there was a really interesting challenge there about how we need to still bridge some of that gap around affordability. And I think it's a really interesting one, because clearly it feels, you know, we're doing something here that is beyond the market, and even then, you quite, I think, helpfully articulated why even that is still a challenge for many people who we will want to be included in this. And I think there are definitely things that we could look at ourselves, bridging some of that gap. But I think it also does highlight some of those structural challenges purely around cost. And I agree with your point about VAT. And I also think it's, you know, there's something there about, you know, maybe that wider challenge back to the government around, well, what is universal credit meant to provide? Really, it should be providing a sort of sufficient level of living, and we know that that's not always the case for many people. And I think it's interesting that I think the Trussell Trust, the Food Bank Network, are running what they call their Essentials campaign, and what they're actually saying is when you work out the essentials of living well, you basically need to uplift universal credit fairly significantly. Now, we're not in control of any of that, so I think there's a point here about us being able to articulate that to the decision makers and being able to say, actually, we can clearly demonstrate how even at a social tariff, this is beyond the affordability of a lot of the people we want to reach. But at the same time, I think if we can start thinking of our own ways of bridging that gap, even as a sort of sticking plaster, temporary, whatever, then I think it just adds weight to the work that's happening here. But I think there's lots of really interesting ones in there. Definitely something about how we work together better, and I think that's something we will learn. Definitely something about that digital inclusion role, which I know is a bit patchy. That's from my experience as well. Even in my own council, I sort of say who's doing digital inclusion, and it sort of can depend on the circumstances. So I do recognise some of what you've fed back on the structural relationship side, but on that crucial part about affordability, I think that's going to be one of the really tricky ones for us to try and grapple with. Probably not all within our gift, but lots for us to keep thinking about and working on.
Well, thank you for those comments. I just wonder, And Nick, do you recognise any of those findings from your perspective?
So completely, I was about to type a comment, but I'll say it instead. I think this point about who provides the subsidy to make this affordable, you know, this is the big kind of elephant in the room that we need to crack, because you know, as with providing subsidized housing, subsidizing any service provision requires subsidy from somewhere. And I think what this research has highlighted is that at the moment, with all the best will of the commercial ISPs, they can get down to a certain price, but actually what is then affordable to end users is below that. So that gap, how do we meet it? Clearly VAT is one aspect. You know, would I say we would be successful in persuading the current government to change the rules on VAT? I'd possibly be less than optimistic about that, because that's a sort of, you know, massive fiscal change. But there's absolutely no doubt that broadband has to be considered in any future medium and longer term strategic debate about digital inclusion. It's got to be considered as a basic utility, and therefore it has to be made affordable to people. Otherwise, the inequality gap, which digital inclusion is one aspect of, will simply accelerate as more and more we move to a more digitally enabled society. So the issue about how we do that in the shorter term, I think, does require conversations between local government, GMCA, housing providers, commercial entities, and gaining some consensus so that we can attract central government into that conversation and actually start, you know, gaining some more positive commitments other than sort of vague, yes, it's a good idea from central government, because it is absolutely crucial. And we can roll out and we can promote and we can evangelize all we like, but if the bottom line is people just can't afford to pay the current social tariff, then, you know, we're not going to have that traction that's necessary to really deliver what residents need. So yeah, I think that is the big issue.
Very much, Nick. No, that's quite a neat segue, I think, into the work that Tim's been doing with the Welsh Government on minimum digital standards. Currently, there are interventions in place in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, but not in England on this. And I just wonder, Sim, whether you could talk a little bit about that, unless there are any further questions that anybody would like to raise at this point. Okay, Sim, you're on.
I am very conscious we're way over time, John, and I know that Joe and Rachel are supposed to speak, so I'm going to do this in like 2 minutes. I've put the link to the website for the research in the chat. I know some of the people on the call were at our launch meeting, so they've had the full works. I'm just going to show the thing itself. If I can, I'll just share the screen. So that's is that, yeah, there we go. That worked. Yay. Can you all see that? Right, without going over too much detail, essentially, this is a definition of the minimum needs a household with children have to be digitally engaged in contemporary British society. It was defined by families and households, not by academics, right? It's not a bunch of researchers said this is what they need. This is what families of all types, from the richest to the poorest, with and initially all household types, older people, young people, and it's also included some work with young people aged 13 to 18. In future, we're going to expand it to other household types, say older retired couple, young person living on their own, etc. This is the one for households with children. It's got 3 parts: the digital goods and services they need, the practical skills they should have as a family to be able to use those goods and services, and then the critical kind of skills around managing risk to be able to live online safely and with confidence. you can read the full reports. The Welsh Government are making use of this already. We're doing further work on this over the next year to map, who's above it, who's below it in the UK. Last quick caveat, this is based on the minimum income standards work that Loughborough University do. The minimum income standard is way above minimum wage. Yeah, and it's above what the government classes as a living wage, though it informs that living wage. The minimum income standard is one by which the moment people go below it, they start to become disadvantaged. This is a minimum digital living standard. If you start to drop below this, families believe you start to suffer disadvantage. Right, so this is not a statement the government should provide all of this, nor is it a statement that this is like the absolute minimum, and if you get that, you can basically survive. That's a mobile, that's a smartphone and some free data, right? But that's not enough to live well in a contemporary British society. So this is what families believe. If you go below this, you start to get disadvantaged. Your children get disadvantaged at school, you get disadvantaged in employment, etc., etc. You are more at risk. So that's what it means by a minimum. It's the line below which digital disadvantage truly starts. If you want to see all the details, there's a short summary report on the website. There's a long report, and if you can speak Welsh, it's all available in Welsh as well. Conscious of others have got to speak.
Thank you very much, Sam. That's brilliant. And all that work is great. And all that work will then feed in also into the kind of conclusions from this pilot as well. It's a serendipity really that work is going on. What I'd like to do now is invite Joe Sandwick and Rachel Evans to talk about the work they've been doing in a specific pilot at Southway Homes. The interesting thing about the Southway Homes pilot is it's the only one that focuses on mobile. All the other ones are around fixed connectivity and the issues on that. And perhaps as a kick-off, I don't know who would want to go first. Perhaps Joe would like to talk about what you've been doing first, and then we'll go on to Rachel to talk about from the ISP perspective how it's worked. Is that okay?
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for that, John. So my name is Joe Sandwick. I'm the Digital Inclusion Officer at Southway Housing Trust. Just a reminder of the project that we've been doing with Vodafone. So as John said, it's SIM only, so a lot more straightforward, I think, than some of the other housing trusts have had to contend with. No wayleaves, no installations, etc. So I think we've been quite fortunate with that. We've received 1,000 SIMs off Vodafone, and they're 6 months free calls, texts, and data. And we've targeted, initially we were going to target different cohorts for over 75s, people with disability, people needing work. But we just didn't have enough people to target there. So we targeted all our tenants, so 6,000 of our tenants. The project's gone pretty well. We've distributed around 400 SIMs so far, and we've pretty much tried to market it from every angle we could think of. So traditional methods like websites, social media, newsletters, digital leaflets, as well as physical leaflets. We've sent text out to tenants advertising it. We created a form on our website which gets sent through to our customer hub and then passed on to myself or one of my colleagues. And we've also been working with different departments within the Housing Trust. So the advice team we've been working closely with, and we gave them some SIM cards to distribute because they come across people that are desperate for this kind of thing every day. So we work closely with them, with our reception team. We've left some SIM cards with them. So anyone coming into reception that the reception team feels would benefit from this, they can talk to them about the project and offer those SIM cards to them. Our community centre at Westcroft Community Centre in Burnage as well, we've given them SIM cards to distribute. And obviously all our staff have been made aware of it. So it's really been very beneficial to have all other staff members on board with this and helping out so that we can kind of attack it from all angles. So what we got. So yeah, as well as this, we've had digital champions help out with people that have got SIM cards but aren't necessarily comfortable using being online and using the data. So we've got volunteers called digital champions. You can go out to their homes and help them with bits and bobs. We've also been able to give out tablets. We do a laptop loan scheme anyway, but these SIM cards can go in tablets, phones, as well as dongles. So we've given out a few of them as well. And then we've had a central spreadsheet, a public spreadsheet for all the different departments to kind of access, so they can write down this data, so we can keep a track of who's been receiving SIMs as well. So all in all, I'd say it's been pretty successful. Probably the most difficult part that we found is the admin for it. Luckily, though, we have been able to, because the SIM cards are so flat, we have actually been able to post them out as well. So in terms of, I think we've got pretty fortunate in terms of how easy it was to get these out to people quickly. But it'll be interesting to see from Rachel how many of these SIMs have actually been activated, because I know last time we spoke it was probably only 100 odd that were activated. So although we distributed quite a bit, I don't know if these have all been used up. And also from Simeon, who's doing the feedback with a lot of our tenants. I know his team have been working on that. So yeah, all in all, pretty good. But any questions, feel free.
Thank you very much, Joe. That's great. I just wonder whether we'll hold off some questions till after Rachel talk through her experience as well.
Yep, no problem.
Okay, great. Well, hi everyone. Lovely to speak to you all. For those who haven't met me before, my name's Rachel Evans. I work at Vodafone UK. I work in our sustainable business team, and my job is to look after what we call our Everyone Connected campaign, which we've been running for nearly 3 years now at Vodafone. It started with an ambition to help connect 1 million people. We kind of reached that target at the end of last year, and we've now got a longer term strategy till the end of 2025 to help 4 million people. So that's just like a little bit of background on me. It's been great working on this pilot. I think, as we've kind of already said, we're in a slightly different position from some of the other partners here, where we've been providing mobile connectivity. To answer kind of straight away Joe's question there on the activation, what's been really interesting and great about this programme is that we're seeing, based on the latest numbers, that about 40% of the SIMs that have been handed out are actually active on our network and are being used, which, when we look at kind of some of our other programs where we're distributing free connectivity, that this is one of the highest ones that we're seeing. And I think that absolutely shows how all those additional support measures that Joe's touched on there that are in place to help people is really then supporting in the active use of the SIMs. Also, sorry if I'm waving a hand in front of my face, there is a fly who is persistently flying in front of me. What I think has also been interesting from this study, which, because we're providing the mobile connectivity, is that the data usage that we're seeing through these SIMs is actually relatively low in terms of how people are using the SIMs. What we're finding is that actually the highest usage is on the voice minutes, so calls that people are making. We're kind of seeing, on average, from month to month, it varies from about 118 minutes per user on average to around 80 minutes per user per month on average. So that's just really interesting to see that actually, that whilst yes, the data is there and they're using it, they're actually making the most of some of the other services there more. Similarly, SMS is relatively high from a usage point of view. So that's been quite interesting to see through this study. I think I'd also just touch on where we're at. So as Joe mentioned, this is 6 months free connectivity with 40 gigs of data each month, and the calls and the texts. The piece of work that we've been looking at, which I know has been talked about earlier in this call, is on that affordability piece for people beyond kind of what happens after that 6 months. And it was great to hear Councillor O'Brien talking about the Trussell Trust Guarantee Our Essentials campaign, because we've been working with the Trussell Trust for kind of over 2 years now, distributing our free connectivity through their network of food banks, and we're actively working with them on this campaign. And it's actually through our work with them that we've been able to look at, okay, it's great that we're able to provide this free connectivity when someone is at that moment of crisis where they're at a food bank, but what do we do after the 6 months? And so we brought out at the end of last year for we call them our Everyone Connected customers, so someone who has received free connectivity, at the end of the 6 months, they have available to them a £5 a month tariff. So I think coming back to some of the conversations here around affordability and what level, that feels like a slightly better level, albeit it's a mobile solution. It's not a broadband product solution. But they have a £5 a month mobile tariff that gives them 7 gigabytes of data per month and unlimited calls and texts. And that's something that's exclusively available to those customers that have received the free connectivity. So all of the participants in this study that we've been working on with Joe will be able to access that tariff. And I think that's just something that's been able to help us with more from a sustainability point of view. What is that kind of that next step that can kind of help people carry on with that connectivity so that they're not dropping off after the 6 months? I think those were all of the key points I was going to make. As Simeon kind of mentioned, you're still to yet meet with us. I know you're meeting with Catherine Russell, I think, later this week to kind of get some more insights from us. But I might pause there, but happy to answer any questions or hear any comments.
Anybody have any comments or questions on that? Tim? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, I'm on mute. Just a nice crossover. You know, the Trussell Trust work that you referenced is actually supported by the evidence base that's built by the Loughborough people, the Minimum Income Standards team, and the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, that they provide that to. So there's a kind of nice crossover to our minimum digital living standards work and the project work here, because we're working with them. You know, they're part of our team that's delivered that, but also that methodology and that approach is what, you know, has underpinned our take on digital inclusion. So that, I mean, there is quite, you know, there really is an overlap between those minimum income standards, what the benefits can cover, that's from that real hard affordability side of things, and then the stuff on the accessibility, the costs, social tariffs, but also the skills and whatever. They're all part of a combined thing. And you know, there's something in there about tying those together when we're talking about this stuff, to remember that, you know, digital, in quotes, digital poverty is part of poverty, in the same way that food poverty is part of poverty, that clothing poverty is part of poverty, you know, that sanitary care poverty is part of poverty. It's all the, you know, people nicely put it in boxes, but actually it's all part and parcel of one bigger picture, you know. And we need to remember to make those connections. But that was a little rant.
Thanks, Tim. I've got 3 questions. So Jodie, Jill and then Bina. Jodie, do you want to come in?
I can go first if you like. I'm going to put Rachel on the spot slightly if I can. Sorry, Rachel, to do it to you. But you guys came at this from a different angle than we did from an ISP perspective, being mobile synced. And I just wondered, from Vodafone's perspective, whether you guys had considered moving into 4G routers as a solution, where we look at, I appreciate we're looking at social housing, so it's not as big an issue on this audience, but from a digital inclusion point of view, it ticks quite a lot of boxes from temporary accommodation and homelessness. And I didn't know whether you guys had looked down that line at all.
You're absolutely putting me on the spot, but I wouldn't expect you to do any less, so that's fine. It's a good question. We've in a few smaller outside of this pilot, we've had a few examples of where we've gone down the 4G router solution. I think there's probably a lot more in it, and you're right. Maybe if we had another strand to this pilot, could it be another solution that could be looked at? I think it's actually a really fair point. But yeah, it's not one that we're actively doing at the moment.
Well, thank you. I've got Jill.
Yeah, and I think this could be a bit of a question for Simeon, and I was just interested to note what the digital champions, the volunteer scheme, the access to the tablet loans, the phones and devices, and it's the education, the tablets linked to the infrastructure and the digital access, because I think, Rachel's really interesting. You've got the back end data on how that is being used and what it's being used for, predominantly for voice minutes and SMS. So it was just a question, I think it's to Simeon really, because you did mention skills, and I work for the LTE group, and we're sort of very interested in the integrated skills system and how our students can be part of the solution. So I just thought the bit that you said that was missing in this was that skills piece, and going forward you would want to be looking at that skills development, because it's okay having but nobody's going to use it unless they know how to use it. So it's just a thought.
No, I completely agree. I mean, it has been my kind of another soapbox rant that, you know, and something that we worked a lot on with the Good Things Foundation was making the argument that access is not enough. You know, if access were enough, then a smartphone with a SIM would be enough, right? To get people to a point where whatever. Now, I am not knocking providing SIMs and smartphones and basic equipment. Absolutely the opposite, right? You know, they're like food banks and like other things. They're a safety net, and they help citizens stay engaged and get their benefits, or get their school to make your child education and everything, you know. And a fully functioning, working, got enough data, fast enough, you know, 4G dongle type solution, that's great. That's absolutely brilliant, whatever. But you're right, if people aren't skills to use it, but also the confidence, you know, in their skills, so that we always talk about older people not being confident and worry about being scammed, etc. But when you look at, and I know, and this is another one soapbox of mine, what a lot of younger people who don't go into further and higher education do with digital devices, it's very low levels of stuff, and it's mostly WhatsApp, and it's mostly TikTok these days, or Instagram or whatever. And that's not really going to give them employability skills that will therefore drive up other types of use, like more beneficial use for them in terms of supporting their children when they have children or whatever. So yeah, the skills piece is huge, you know, and I think this is why digital inclusion is such an intractable issue for many people, is that they want a quick solution. Let's give a lot of laptops away, right? Cracking the other bits takes work, and it's not going to go away until we've solved some of this stuff inside education, or we've solved it in other areas of infrastructure. So I absolutely agree. You know, you got to get all parts together to make it really, really, really work.
Yeah, and I think that's where we're coming from, really thinking through a digital inclusion strategy around the education piece, right through from schools, early years schools, through the system into post-16, and then that almost virtuous circle that you talked about, because it's actually education will drive the use, and then the infrastructure needs to be available parallel. I think spot on. Thank you.
Bina, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I suppose Sim's already covered the affordability, the poverty angle. I suppose what we're hearing here are the complexities around the need to look at all of the complexities, like skills, like access, at the same time, and therefore, and address those and locally, and therefore having a dedicated, focused person in each local authority to focus around this is essential to us getting anywhere around addressing digital exclusion as a region in Greater Manchester. I know there's colleagues here from other regions on this call. In Greater Manchester, we do have a local lead in each of the local authorities. However, you know, as Councillor Eamon had said, the ability to focus around this is different in each of the local authorities. Just wanted to highlight the comments around addressing the poverty angle. Now, we've got a GM data bank, a Greater Manchester data bank, as part of the Good Things Foundation National Data Bank. It's been going for 8 months now, and 20,000 residents have benefited in 8 months. So those SIM cards, it's 6 months free connectivity. This was an emergency response, and those SIM cards are given out by community groups that identify people that come to them who have a need. 20,000 residents have a need around that free connectivity. And I know this pilot was here to try and look at how do we support uptake, how do we support participation, and what we're hearing here is through collaboration with local authorities and those local systems, we can enhance uptake. And that 40% from Rachel, you know, that is the fact that it's your highest uptake in terms of the SIMs speaks for itself. But in terms of the longer term and sustainable focus, now we mentioned the Trussell Trust here. I was having a conversation yesterday. So I lead the digital inclusion agenda for Greater Manchester, so involved in quite a few different conversations, and poverty is certainly an angle that we take. The Trussell Trust is telling us now some of the interventions are providing mobile phones to homeless people. But what we have got feedback on are people are selling their phones because people are living, whether it's 2 week, you know, paycheck to paycheck, people are living in that way. And the question back to us was, can we get more phones? I suppose the question is, how are we addressing those those real barriers around people living in situations where they have to sell the phones and the support that they're getting? How are we addressing those wider connected implications of not just people living in poverty, but people living in low incomes? So there needs to be that locally led approach here. So I just wanted to reiterate that link into poverty, digital poverty, health exclusion and access, as well as financial exclusion. But it's really interesting conversation. Thanks, John.
Highlighting the complexity of the issue. I've got a question from Raffaella.
Hi there. Hi. Yeah,
Hi.
just I guess expanding on the topic of digital champions. At Virgin Media O2 Business, we supported Wythenshawe Community Housing Group with some of the work that they were doing by using our Connect More programme, which is using our people, our employees, to be digital champions. So we support some of the housing groups sessions that they host each week, which are run by Alistair, who's their digital inclusion officer. And I think the fact that they have Alistair is amazing. And I think having an Alistair in every single housing association would be a great thing to have. And then it was just really interesting seeing, I guess, how our digital champions could support residents through the live chat process that we have for our social tariff. I guess the point back to, I guess, engagement and whether the social tariffs are, you know, appealing and, you know, viable for people is a valid point here, because we did find that engagement was quite low, but you know, all the champions said that they felt that it was a really meaningful way to support people, because, you know, at the end of it, people had an engineer booked in to come and visit the house. So from a champion perspective, I think a model like that could be a really effective way to help people register with the social tariffs.
Yeah, agree with that. Certainly use Alistair everywhere in terms of the work that he's been doing.
Yeah.
So I think what what I want to do now perhaps is to bring, has anybody got any further questions that they would want to raise at this particular point? It's great conversation, this, and all this is going to really feed into forward thinking and gives us plenty of food for thought as to how we move forward and present this. Let me just share with you in terms of where we are with regard to the next steps on this, because this is the final research sharing session in advance of an event we're looking to stage in June. So you should be able to see that. So, and I haven't shared with Sim, so hopefully it kind of aligns with his timetable too. But see the completion of the research happening in April, May, and there'll be further interviews, I think, that are going on up to that particular point in time. And the intention then is to start to share some of these findings with social housing providers and internet service providers. I'm thinking in particular with you, Nick, we can start to kind of share some of these with all the social housing providers, even those who are outside of the pilot areas, so that we can kind of galvanize interest there. We're looking at a dissemination event around June this year. What we're looking to do there is use that as a way in which we can develop and shape the rollout model across Greater Manchester. What that looks like, what needs to be the role of social housing providers and local authorities and internet service providers as well. But also, as important as mentioned today, what other interventions are we going to actually need to lobby for here on the back of this, given the findings that we've got and given the findings that Sim has also got on the minimum digital standards. So those are the kind of forward next steps. So they're going to be shaped over the next few weeks. Just checking that aligns with Sim in terms of his timetable as well. Oh, he put his thumbs up. That's always encouraging. That's brilliant. So what I want to do, unless anybody's got any further questions or queries, I'd like to bring this session to a close and thank you for everybody who's participated in it. It's great the way in which it's coming together, and the kind of continued goodwill and learning from this. You know, there's no such thing as failure in a discovery piece like this. It's all learning for us. So I'd like to say thank you very much for joining this call, and look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you.